Welcome to Candid Conversation. Today's question, why do animals suffer? And the answer is because of sin. Not individual specific sin, but I mean the fact that we are now under the curse of sin. When God made the world, He said to Adam, He made animals on the sixth day, then He made man, and He told Adam, to have dominion over the earth and subdue it. So he was in charge. And when Adam sinned, now all of a sudden the creation bears the brunt. Well, man, of course, too, but creation bears the curse of sin. You had Romans 8 talks about how the whole creation groaneth and travaileth. When it's just everything, not just animals, but trees, plants, the earth. When Cain killed Abel, God says to Cain, when Cain says, well, I don't know where my brother is. Am I my brother's keeper? And God says, you killed your brother Abel. The voice of his blood cries to me from the ground. The ground is under the curse because it has had to absorb righteous blood. It has to have dirt come back to it because dust, man is dust, and the moment that man was made out of the dust, and the moment that man sins, God tells man in the curse, dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. So now the ground has to absorb sinful man, the blood of righteous man absorbed by the ground. The ground is cursed. That's why we have earthquakes. It's under the curse of sin. All these natural disasters is a result of the curse of sin. And animals, the reason animals suffer is because of the curse of sin. That when man sins, man sews fig leaves together to try to cover his body because man lost his clothing of light. So he's now naked and ashamed. And God, what He does is He creates coats of skins. So God killed a couple of lambs there. And because the blood, without the shedding of blood, Hebrews says, there is no remission. And of course, ultimately, it's the blood of Jesus Christ that gives us remission of sins. But in the meantime, with Israel, God sets up a fleshly covenant, and when they bring the sacrifices prescribed by Moses, then that blood of those animals is a covering for their sin. At least it's a fleshly covering. And you read the Old Testament, you see sacrifices all the time. When you get to the millennial reign, still you're going to have animal sacrifices there because the Gentiles are going to be under that Mosaic law, and they'll have to bring the sacrifice as a covering for their sin, sacrificing of the animals. So you got all these animals being killed because another thing, to be a covering for sin, but it's mainly there to show man that he is a sinner. Because it's one thing for me to just say, oh, I'm sorry, Lord, for my sin, please forgive me. But it's quite another if I've got to take an animal that I raised, or I got to use money that I don't have much money, but yet I got to go and buy an animal. And then I got to bring that animal to the temple. And then I got to put my hand on the head of that animal. And then the priest slays it. And so then the blood of the animal is a covering for my sin. That shows it really hurts me financially. It really hurts me emotionally. That it shows me how bad my sin is, that an animal has to die for my sin. So when you have man sinning, the first thing you see is God, to make it right, He slays a couple of lambs and makes those coats of skins for Adam and Eve. So it is, animals suffer as a result of our sin. One thing to understand is animals are made different than man. Man is body, soul, and spirit. God when he made man, he formed the body out of the dust of the ground. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, so that was a spirit there. And then as a result of the breath of life, man became a living soul. God did not do that with animals. Animal has the spirit of an animal, and it has the body of an animal, but it doesn't have the breath. The soul. Doesn't have the soul. So when I die, because I've trusted in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for my sin, I go to heaven. When an unbeliever dies, he goes to hell. The soul lives on forever. When God breathed into man's nostrils the breath of life, God made man to be an eternal being, to live forever. Animals, though, were placed on earth for man. And because we sin, suffering is part of that. In the Millennial Kingdom, it talks about the wolf will lay down with the lamb. That the child will play, and he'll put his hand on the cockatrice's den. In other words, on the venomous snake's den. And no problem. You won't have, it says, those animals will not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain. So they're in Zion, where Israel is under the new covenant, and there is no sin in Jerusalem. Well, then all these animals, they don't hurt each other, they don't hurt themselves. But you look at animals now being under the curse of sin, now they treat each other differently. The wolf finds the lamb and it goes and devours it, it eats it. But before the curse of sin, all these animals were vegetarians, and man was vegetarian as well. But now, because of the curse of sin, man eats animals, and animals eat animals. Why does man suffer? Well, because he's under the curse of sin, and so animals too have to suffer. The whole creation groans and travails, being under that curse of sin. We need to understand that because animals do not have a soul, they do not live forever. And so God made them for man, for a specific purpose, for man. Now, when you're in the Millennial Kingdom, you don't have animals killing each other, you don't have animals hurting man, and you don't have man hurting animals. And so you can do it like going to a national park. One of the last things Lana and I did was we went to South Dakota. We saw more animals there than on any other trip we've been on. It was wonderful seeing we saw goats and sheep and prairie dogs, a couple herds of buffalo. We saw deer, cows, of course. We saw all kinds of animals. It was great. We weren't killing them, and they weren't killing us. And they weren't killing each other. It was just, you enjoy looking at the animals, and every animal has a different characteristic, different way of living. Most people have animals as when they have pets. Most of them, of course, you can have all kinds of pets, but usually they either have dogs or cats. Well, the reason is because a dog acts a lot like a man, and a cat acts a lot like a woman. So you've got an animal to be your pet that acts like a human being, except you don't have the bad part of it. Because man and a woman living together, they get mad at each other because they each have their own will of what they want to do. But an animal operates on instinct. You can have a dog that's mean, well, that's because it's trained to be mean. It didn't make the free will decision to be mean. It just does what it does on instinct. And so people like to have a dog or a cat as a pet because it reminds you of a man or a woman, except you don't have the talking back. You don't have the free will of the animal to where it wouldn't do what you want it to do. So then pets become more valued to people than even humans, because humans talk back, but animals don't. They do whatever you want them to do. The dog used to be called man's best friend because the dog is a lot like a man. So, a man has another man as a friend. Well, Even better, you got a dog, because then the dog won't betray you. It'll be there and get your slippers, get your paper, that type of thing. And so you see the dog as what a man is like. You see a cat as what a woman is like. You got all these other animals, they teach you things too. You see how they operate, how they survive, what they do. They all have this instinct. And so you see different characteristics of the nature of God, nature of man, the nature of different things when God made these animals and what they do. And because they do it by instinct, they don't go against, because they don't have a will like man does. Now, of course, like I said, a dog, you mistreat it, it'll be scared, or maybe it'll fight back. You can, based upon how man interacts with the dog, it will change its behavior. And same thing with a lot of other animals, but for the most part, it's just going to operate on instinct. With man, sex is a big thing. You see that all over the news and all over TV. It's just everything is about sex, it seems like. But with animals, because they're not using their will to decide what they're going to do, and they're going to have sex with somebody, they just operate by instinct. So you've got male and female animals that won't get together for sex, and then all of a sudden the woman's in heat, and then the female animal is in heat, and now you've got they have sex for that period, and then once that period of time is over, because now they've had the babies are being created, the baby animals, well then they don't have sex anymore. It's not something like, it's not a big drive like today. It's just instinct. It's that time of year, so then we're going to have sex, and we're going to have the animals created, and then when it's not that time of year, we're not going to have sex. So what it shows you there is that animals, they don't have that free will like we do. They operate on instinct, and they also change based upon their environment. But their environment is now a sin-cursed world. And because of that, there is now suffering. So in God's eternal kingdom, there is no suffering for animals. But in this world, there is. And there's probably more suffering now because of the curse of sin. Because remember, the animals are there to teach us things. There are different characteristics that certain animals have over the others. You'll see God even uses animals in his description, especially in the book of Proverbs. He spends a whole bunch of time talking about an ant in the book of Proverbs and how it works harder than any other animal, but it's the smallest of animals. And you can just, you can have fun having a little ant farm and watching what the ants do. They're hard workers. They get things done. They do a lot more than most animals. Most animals, you go to a zoo, remember, animals are a victim of their environment, basically. So then the animals there in the zoo, they're just lazy. They sit around and do nothing because they don't have to hunt for food. They don't have to fight. They just sit around and they get fed by the zookeepers. So basically the reason animals suffer is due to sin, and it's because, what it is it's better because they're made for man. Now in eternity, probably animals will live forever. I don't know, the Bible doesn't really say, but it would make sense if man's living forever and he's not under the curse of sin anymore. He's not sinning, so animals are at peace. Maybe the animals live forever too, I don't know. But right now they don't. And when they die, they don't go to heaven or they don't go to hell. They just cease to exist because they don't have an eternal soul. And you look in the Old Testament and all those animals that were sacrificed. Well, what it does is it teaches man of his sin. And in the millennial reign, the Gentiles are going to be sacrificing animals. And you say, well, that's mean. Well, the animals aren't eternal, and they're just made for man. Some people become vegetarians because they say, well, I don't want to harm any living thing. I want to, I don't want to have to. If I eat a chicken, well, then the chicken had to die for me. So I don't want to have to eat chicken, or I don't want to eat any meat because there was an animal had to die for it. Well, the fact of the matter is, whatever you eat was alive. Because if it wasn't alive, you're not going to get any nourishment from it. Something that's dead, it doesn't give you any nourishment. So it's got to be something that's alive, and if you eat it, then you kill it. So even if you're a vegetarian, you end up killing the plants. You know, if you eat collard greens, well, the greens had to die. They were living, they were in the ground. Just because they can't talk doesn't mean they're not alive. So the animal, the plants had to give up their life for you to have a meal. In eternity, you have life. Not only do they grow, but those plants, those trees, they have life in them. There's a book of Isaiah talks about all the when the mountains shall break forth with singing. It says all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. In the garden, you had Satan. He talked. He's called a serpent. Now, he probably wasn't a literal snake running around there, but he was called a beast of the field. He was more subtle than any of the beasts of the field, and yet he talked. So you've got animals. Can animals talk in the millennial reign? Maybe. I don't know. They have, when they're not under the curse of sin, they're going to be in a whole lot better shape than they are now. But there is life in everything that God made. The plants, the trees, and the animals. So now an animal can cry in pain. It can suffer. But you won't hear that from a plant. But you know it suffers too. It just can't cry. But in the millennial reign, we know the trees of the field shall clap their hands. The mountains shall break forth with singing. So, maybe plants can feel things. You notice a plant, when a branch breaks off, well, then there's death to that. Does that hurt that plant? Oh, yeah. But you don't know it because it doesn't cry. But in the millennial reign, maybe it can talk. I don't know. I don't know how all that works. But I do know, when asked the question, why do animals suffer? The reason is because of our sin. Because in that millennial reign, the wolf is going to lay down with the lamb. The little child's going to be playing with poisonous snakes, except they're not poisonous anymore. You don't have animals killing each other. That was one thing. I like watching nature shows and seeing the animals, and Alana liked it too, until they started killing each other. And then she couldn't watch it. So we couldn't watch nature shows because they'd always show a lion killing a gazelle or something, or a killer whale going after something in the ocean, and she couldn't bear to watch that. Well, that's not going to happen when the curse of sin is removed. And so all the suffering, you think of your pet dog or your pet cat, and it has some it can have diseases and suffering and be in pain. I remember the first dog that, when I was a kid, that my Uncle Rick had, and we had a same backyard there, so I played a lot with that dog. At the end there, it was in pain. I don't know what was wrong with it, but it was it was screaming in pain. And so you hate to see that. You hate to see anybody, humans especially, but animals as well. You hate to see anybody suffering. Well, you're not going to have that when the curse of sin is removed. Romans 8 talks about the whole creation groans and travaileth in pain, waiting for that time when sin is removed. And even ourselves, we groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our bodies. Animals suffer. You think man, well, we know man suffers because of our sin. And not specific sins, but just the sin nature and the curse of sin we're under. So that's why there are diseases and why people die. But when you get to a curse of sin being removed, then people aren't going to die. And animals the same way. They're not going to suffer. So they'll probably live forever too. Again, the Bible doesn't tell you that, but they'll probably live forever. So really the short answer is, why do animals suffer? It's because of the curse of sin that we're all under. And until that curse of sin is removed, well, the whole creation is going to groan and travail, and it's everything. You think of animals just because you can hear them cry. Like my pet dog, I could hear it cry in pain. You don't hear a plant cry, but it probably does. I mean, it's probably suffering because it's alive. So when a branch dies or something, or it doesn't have enough water, it's going to suffer. But you just don't know it because you can't hear it, because it can't cry out. And the earth, I mean, the earth had to accept the blood of Abel. The earth groaned from that. And now we have earthquakes. You have these natural disasters, tsunamis and hurricanes and tornadoes and all that. Well, that's just part of being under that curse of sin. And everything alive is suffering as a result of sin. Humans, animals, plants, the earth, the dirt, everything suffering because of that. So animals, yeah, it's sad to see animals suffer, especially if it's a pet that you love, but it's just part of that being under the curse of sin. And remember, God gave us animals to show us stuff, and so the main function of animals is to show us our sin and that we need to be saved. And then you can save little Bambi or little dog or little cat, because it's not going to suffer, because in heaven we won't be under the curse of sin. Thanks for watching.